Orca and I are going to show you some Parker 51s that I have. And Orca is a little shy about speaking on camera, so I will convey his opinions as well as my own. Parker 51s are a magical pen, as I've mentioned other times in these videos. It's magical because, Kitty, you have to move out of the way. I know you want to give me a bath. 51s are magical in a number of ways. One of the ways is that they have the ability to surprise people. Often in the middle of the night, they wake up in a cold sweat and they say things like, "Aha, I get it. Eureka, I found it." I, among other very intelligent people, at one point in our lives decided that 51s were just useless. They were useless pens. There was no value to them because they couldn't do anything fun. They couldn't do this. Well, they can skip. Yes, they can skip when they're running out of ink. Sorry, grabbed the wrong pen. They couldn't do this. And why would you choose a 51 over any pen that can do that? It doesn't have to be gold and glitzy and glamorous like this. It can just be a boring old black pen like this. Could be this pen. Does this have a flexible nib? This has a very wet noodly nib. But why would you choose a Johnny One Note pen over something that has a range? Well, in my pen collecting days, I would pass up 51s because they were just too boring looking. I remember finding at an antique shop a box of about 15 mint sterling silver capped gray bodied Vacuumatic 51s, just like this. And I remember thinking, I think they might have been $5 each or something like that. And I remember thinking, you know, I kind of like sterling. I kind of like the look of the pen a little tiny bit, but so I'll buy one. I bought one of them and left the other dozen to the next guy. But eventually I ended up buying this company and buying and selling pens to the general public. And I would have people specifically asking for Parker 51s. And George Salustro at the Bromfield Pen Shop loved 51s, and when I bought my company that had, you know, a couple dozen of them, Aerometric 51s, you know, new, mint in the box almost, probably new. I sold them all to him because I had no use for them. I didn't understand them. So he bought them all and he sells them all. It was his favorite pen to sell, I think. But I started listening to my customers, and eventually I started understanding the value of this pen. Now, these two pens here, if 51s were like this, where they had two notes, you know, broad, you know, these are stub nibs, which are these are original stub nibs, which are relatively rare in 51s. And if more 51s had nibs like this, I might have liked them better, but I would not have liked them correctly. To like these pens is, I don't want to say it's a no-brainer, but it is sort of a no-brainer. You like the pen without having to think about it. The 51 is a thinking man's pen. You have to use lots of brain cells to understand it. And once all of your brain cells are aligned correctly, you'll have this aha, eureka moment, I think. And at least two people I know came up to me. They didn't come up to me, they called me at one point. They kept on saying, it was like the guy in Green Eggs and Ham, I hate 51s, I hate 51s. I don't like them here or there, I don't like them anywhere, I hate 51s. And I said, well, this is after I had my conversion. Because, well, I should talk about my conversion first. I started listening to my pen purchasers, my pen customers who loved this pen. And my conversion was slow and steady. It evolved into a passion. And that is not common in people that are now fond of the 51, that were not fond of it before. Most people that have this sort of Green Eggs and Ham moment, when they suddenly understand the beauty of these pens, it happens overnight. In an instant it happens. It's not something you learn to appreciate for the most part. They happen instantly. I was a slow learner, I guess. I didn't understand them for a while. So often I will have 51s in my pocket. There's almost no time when you cannot find me with a 51 either on my desk or in my pocket. Sometimes I'll go suddenly into a really big 51 fix, and I need to have a pocket full of them. And they are not the stub-nibbed 51s. They are the standard kind of nibbed 51s. A 51 that has a point and makes a line. I think that was the mathematical beauty of this pen, the Euclidean beauty of this pen, is what made me finally understand it. And I think it's the Euclidean beauty of this pen that creates the aha moment. When you realize that, and this is something that most people, if you talk to 100 people on the street, 99 of them will say, to the answer to the question, what's a pen for? It makes a line. And what do you make it with? You make it with the little thing at the end, the little point or the little nib or whatever they'd call it. A point makes a line. And in this case, the point and the line that a 51 makes is the one that Euclid would recognize. He would recognize that little tiny dot as a point, and he would recognize that unvaried line as a line. I realize that, you know, the thickness of the dot and the thickness of the line is something that Euclid would take what with? What's the word I want? He wouldn't agree with that. There's a word that I can't think of right now. But he would contest that because there is a depth, a width of the line, not just a length, and Euclidean lines only have length, they don't have width. And a point is just an invisible point, not a thickness of, you know, whatever. You know, I could get out my caliper and prove that there's a thickness to these lines, and that's not what Euclidean would want. You know, there's a whatever that is, whatever that number is, that's not Euclidean. But this is a pen that approaches that. Now you could say, well, there's other pens that do that. Technical pens do that. But technical pens, you know, they have that little needle-like thing that comes down and it makes that line. And that isn't as magical, I don't think, as seeing that little dot of gold or iridium that you see at the very tip of that tapered cone. And I think that was what did it for me when I finally realized, when the math, the cells in my brain that had to deal with math class occasionally kick in when I have to add up something or whatever, but when they understood the Euclidean beauty of this pen, everything fell into place. And it's a joy to have and to use one of these pens. On top of it, on top of that simplicity and beauty of the line that it makes, it also has a sort of simplicity and beauty in how the pen looks. Though it could look simpler, certainly. You know, you didn't have to have the little fins on the clip. You could have, you know, removed any decoration from it whatsoever. But it's so restrained. It's such a restrained decoration that I think it's okay. There's this pen is perfection. Now you can argue, you know, which is more perfect, the original decorative clip or the more stylized feathering, or the signet band at the bottom or the no band at the bottom, and the, you know, the ends and the double jeweled stuff down here. That's insignificant, I think. Most of the pen is very, very simple, and it matches the line that it makes is very, very simple. So, and there's so many other things about this pen that are great. I love the fact that there's two sounds it makes. There's a sound of metal versus metal on metal as you put the cap on. The metal ring hits the metal clutch here. When you put it on the back, it's plastic against plastic. The plastic here and the plastic inner cap hit each other, and it makes a different sound. This is a sort of a scraping noise, a nice soft, imagine Mel Torme making a scraping noise. That's the sound you hear here. And imagine, I don't know what this sound is. This is very soft and Mel Torme-y. This is not. This is a tight, I don't know how to call that sound, but you get your 51 out and you come up with a description of how it's very snug. This is snug. This is less snug. I mean, it gets snug eventually when you really cram it on, but the sound leading up to that is really quite pleasant. Is there anything wrong with this pen? Yes, there is something wrong with it. The old Vacuumatic fillers are troublesome to fix. Back in the olden days, you'd order them from Parker and they'd send you the whole unit. Now you have to salvage the unit, and it's not always easy. So that's could be considered a flaw. The more modern 51s that fill with this ribbed bar thing are essentially idiot-proof. Yes, you can have some flaws like this one has, where there was moisture in this pen at some point, and the chrome plating has deteriorated or corroded here, and it looks kind of nasty, but you don't see that when it's put together. I've always found this filling system to be less pleasant than this one, and I described it once, and I don't know, I mean, it's sort of a nice description, I think. This one is just, it's like taking your pants off at the doctor's office. There's nothing sexy about it. You know, you're in this awful room with neon lighting, and they're going to ask you to turn your head and cough and do all sorts of nastiness with their gloved finger and stuff like that. And there's nothing sexy about taking this off and pressing the ribbed bar. But here, taking off just that little blind cap and pressing that little thing is less, it's more sexy, I guess, and it's more sensual, I guess. Maybe that's the word I want. You know, holding it like this and doing that is maybe more sensual than pinching it like this, you know, or something. I don't know. I'm sure that there's some way that I can learn to describe it better. Okay, perfect pen. I often said George Parker designed the duofold, but God designed the 51. But I think that's impossible because that doesn't work. Anyway, what is the flaw? The flaw of the 51 is this. I'll just tell you what the flaw is. The cone on the where's my demonstrator? Here's my demonstrator. This, well, you can't see it because it's too dark in my house, but inside of this pen is a cone, and it's a inside the cone rather is a collector, and it's this little finned conical shape that the nib is inside, and this is full of ink. So there's just lots of ink up here, and it's not going to come out very easily. You really have to shake it to get the ink out. The ink comes out of the nib the right way, but it's full of ink right now, and it makes it write whenever you want it to write. If, though, you put your pen down and you forget about it for a year or two, or even a couple of months or so, and you didn't put the cap on tightly enough, or there wasn't really a lot of ink in there in the first place, you were running out of ink, the ink might dry in here, and it takes forever for the ink to sort of loosen up and to get out of there. And when you haven't used a 51 for a very long time, you end up with a really long starting process. Before a pen show, when I used to have 51s for sale, I've sold almost all of the 51s that I had in my for sale bin. I would usually uncap all my 51s, make sure they'd work, put them in a nib first, in a big jar of water, and just let them sit for a week or two, just to loosen up all of the potentially dried ink that was in them. And but it's understandable, and it happens only if you have dozens of 51s like I do, and I don't use dozens of them at one time. I sort of use one or two, and then I use 3 or 4, and then I use none for a while, and then I back to using only one, and in that time I end up ignoring them and the ink dries out. All of these pens were in a drawer on my desk that had been used. They had been filled with ink, and they were pens that I was carrying around with me, and now I have to get them going again. So I'm carrying these around, and eventually I'm going to start emptying them out, because my next job is to start selling some of these, because I have probably 30 of each color of the standard colors, and I don't need 30 of them. So these are going to be sold. It's going to be hard for me, as usual, to decide which ones to sell, because they're all so, even with the Johnny OneNote aspect of the pen, they're all so very different. But let me just talk about the Johnny OneNote aspect of it. Even with 51s, there's a variety of line. And I'm not talking about the stub nibs. There's, you know, thick, thinner, thinner, or medium, thinner, thinner. There's some that are big and blobby. There's a big blobby one that I've got here. I know know I have a big blobby one. This is a Parker, English Parker, but I know I have 51, standard 51s that write like that, you know, big, nasty, blobby line. And those, when the lines get more and more blobby like that, I like them less and less because they don't have that Euclidean thing going on. So here's the 51. So the pens, you know, can be medium to fine to extra fine to extra extra fine, you know, but they all have that line, Euclidean line quality. When you flip them upside down, they often will have a much thinner line. In these pens, what I love about using a pen, my favorite 51s are ones that have the most variety between the right side up and the upside down quality of these pens, because it's like having two pens in your hand and you just easily change them by doing that. And you can do this with any pen, I understand that. But with a 51 that has no real variety of line width on the right side up downstroke, this one has a little bit. It's just sort of neat having this magical two pen. Here's another 51 like that. It has the more older cap on it, which shouldn't have. Anyway, so the pen is just amazing, and when you have it be these two different kind of pens, it's extra fun. Isn't that right, Kitty? The cat is saying, "You're writing on my bed." My cat likes to lay right here under the lamp. So he's waiting for me to finish, and I'm sure you're waiting me to finish too, because I'm just rambling at this point. But it's a different kind of experience I have when I'm using a 51. Yes, I like to draw with 51s. Yes, I like to think with 51s. I don't do calligraphy with 51s. Kitty, down. That's not entirely true. I did have to calligraph envelopes with a 51 that had a nib like this. Big blobby nib. They wanted their wedding invitations to look like, they wanted me to copy, to mimic the lettering on an architectural diagram. And so that's why I had to use a pen like that. That was standard. I suppose I could have used a Sharpie or something awful, but anyway. I don't use them for calligraphy. I use them sometimes for drawing and mainly for thinking. And what I mean is I use them for writing. If I'm writing down what I need to do, not just a list of things I need to buy at the grocery store, but when I'm actually trying to write down thoughts that have complexity to it, I love using a 51 because I'm not distracted by anything else. It makes a line. And sometimes if I have to edit, I'll go back and I'll flip it upside down and I'll cram in the word I meant to say, not that word, but this word, and I'll write it smaller because I have less space to play around with. So this is a pen I would use for taking notes in a class. I would use this pen for composing thoughtful paragraphs. You know, a thoughtful sentence, that doesn't take a lot of work, but a thoughtful paragraph, this would be a perfect pen for me because I can easily get distracted halfway through a sentence. But certainly halfway through a paragraph, if I was using a pen with a flexible nib, I would start, even if it's slightly flexible, I might start making pretty letters and then I'm lost. So a 51 is the thinking man's pen, or the thinking woman's pen, or the thinking cat's pen. Isn't that right, Kitty? Oh, he's gone away. So there it is. So right now what I'm trying to do, the reason I'm talking about these in the first place is I'm trying to empty these out of the ink that they're in and just use them up until they're kind of dry. And then I'm going to start looking through my 51 collection and starting to pull out pens that I want to get rid of. And don't worry, I'm not going to be selling a pen like this. It has trauma to it, or pens that have names on them, because those I keep. I'm going to keep this one because of the initials. I don't particularly like names on barrels very much, especially this one that was put in the typewriter and stamped in. But this is one of the later demi sizes, which are kind of rare, and Clarine Wagner is okay. I don't mind that name. This one also has a very nice nib. One last thing just about this pen is occasionally I'll have a 51 that I buy somewhere or that I get to repair that needs a new nib. And it is painfully difficult to make any nib fit in these pens. Sometimes you write with it and the pen doesn't write at all. It doesn't make no ink gets to the paper. Even though it's full and there's ink everywhere, it doesn't get to the paper. And it's because the shell here, the plastic tip, is pressing down so hard on the pen nib that it doesn't splay at all. And so there's a lot of times when I have to take off a shell. If they want that nib in this pen for whatever reason, I have to find a shell to fit it. And that takes time. And I know there's ways to maybe apply heat and do things like that to tweak it, but I don't do that. I just go into the parts bin and find one that works. So there's a lot of trial and error there, but normally it's not a problem. There's another little ding. And a tooth mark. No, that's a ding. This pen has had trauma. This one has had a lot of trauma. Someone used this to put a nail in a wall, it looks like. This isn't, well, no, there's a ding there too. See, these don't bother me. And because they're pre-dinged, I don't have to worry about dropping them on the floor. And when I don't worry about dropping them on the floor, I don't drop them on the floor. MLP, I love the little initials on this one. So anyway, there's my 51 story. So soon I'll have some 51s for sale. So if you want to buy a 51 from me, let me know. It's going to be a while though. It's going to be a long process of deciding which ones can go, because each one of the ones that are in my collection right now have nibs that I really like. And chances are it's going to be pretty hard for me to say goodbye to them. But I'll do my best. And lucky you, and you, and you might get one of these. And if you haven't had the 51 aha moment yet, if you still think they're ugly and they're awful and they don't work and they don't do what you want them to do, you'll be converted at some point. You'll be born again. You'll have that revelation. Trust me, it'll happen. If you're a thinking person, it'll happen. Even if you're not a thinking person, I think maybe even if you're a sensitive person, you'll understand it at some point. If you're just a clod, no, it's never gonna work. But if you like pens and you think and you like to write or you like to draw, you'll understand the beauty of these at one point. Ta-da!